All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into Worldbuilding. This is a special episode because we're meeting at a special time for author John Chu. Welcome, John.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
And so John is a super cool author, and I actually had my act together and put up some links to his short stories on the Patreon and also online so that people could look at them if they felt like it before they came in. And I looked at them. So yay. One of them won the Nebula, I believe.
Oh, no, Hugo.
Sorry, Hugo. The Hugo, that was The Water That Falls on You from Nowhere. And you've got one out now in Uncanny Magazine, which is called Making the Magic Lightning Strike Me. These are very, very interesting stories. And I also went back and I found your Tor.com story about the barricade, which has this very, very long title that I will make sure I put in faithfully in the report.
It's one of those titles that the title makes perfect sense after you read the story, but I'm kind of surprised they let me get away with it. Basically, I kept waiting for them to tell me you have to change the title. No one will ever remember it. And then actually, one of the editors actually did tell me that if it were a book, if it were a novel, they probably would have made me change it because the title is too hard to market. But it's a short story, but it's a short story, so they were cooler with it. But it's funny if you look at the cover art, because the cover art, like, there is really terrific, amazing cover art.
Yeah.
But it's mostly covered by the title.
Yeah. That's funny. Well, so you've got some really interesting things going on in your stories, and I think what I found to be really interesting commonality between them, I guess, is that they're very much engaging in questions of relationships at the same time that they're speculative.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Part of it is that I steal shamelessly from the improv playbook. I have a lot of training in improvised theater, and that, as it turns out, ended up informing my writing for a while before I realized that was what was happening. And then so one of the things that you learn in improv when you do scene work in improv. By the way, I'm just going to take a small sidebar.
Sure.
So that I know that when I say improv, it's invoking the right set of things in your head.
Okay.
Because improv tends to fall into two large general categories. There's short form improv, and there's long form. Short form improv is what most people think of when they think of improv theater. It's theater games. It's like, whose line is it anyway? That sort of thing. Standing. So you play games like standing, sitting, lying down, where you play where at any point where you have three actors, and at any point one of them is standing, one of them is sitting, and one of them is lying down, and then they are given a situation and they go. Right. And then there is long form, which actually has much, and then so those games go really quickly. Long form, obviously, is can be like an entire evening's entertainment. It has a more complicated structure. Things are broken into multiple scenes. The scenes may or may not relate to each other. So there are structures that, the canonical structure is called a herald. I'm not going to go into what a herald is, because this is not John expounding on improv theater. This is just John sort of setting out what I mean by improv. And so when I say improv, I tend to mean long form. I tend to mean the more complicated long form thing. In part because short form improv has this expectation to be funny. Actually, improv in general tends to have an expectation to be funny. But if you talk to like the really hardcore improvisers, what they tell you is that they're aiming for an emotion. They're aiming for it's not necessarily, they're not necessarily trying to be funny. They're aiming to connect with the audience in some way. So getting back to all of that, when one of the things that they stress when in scene work is that they stress the relationship, that when you are up on that stage with this other person, that what you are doing with this other person is you are seeking to find that relationship between, and then so I find that whenever I develop stories, I tend to do that sort of thing. I mean, likewise, another thing that they tell you, which sounds incredibly counterintuitive, is don't do plot. Is basically don't think about plot, in part because plot is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Chip Delaney is in one of his books, basically comes right out and says that the plot is an artifact of the reader. It's the thing that the reader creates in their head as they're reading your story. And then that ties very much into what they tell you in improv, which is, don't be concerned about plot. Just or as one of my as an improv coach said in a workshop I attended once, nobody leaves an improv show saying, and then they fixed the bicycle. By the way, that's actually much funnier if you've been to like a really bad improv show. Because there are any number of bad improv shows where the people involved in the scene get caught up in fixing whatever the putative problem is. So you'll have the scene, and then you'll see these two people brainstorming ways of fixing a flat tire, which is not actually all that interesting. Like the flat tire is there, but the flat tire is MacGuffin. The interesting scene is that the flat tire is there, and you see how these two people relate to each other because of the flat tire. Like nobody cares that they fixed the bicycle. What they care about is how these two people relate to each other. And then so that training gets reflected a lot in my work because it works really well. And it's also what I'm interested in. And it's also like I'm much like I get accused of not writing speculative fiction a lot, and in part, and I think in part it's because I'm focusing on relationships, and I'm focusing on what do these two people mean to each other, and it's undoubtedly affected by whatever the speculative element is, but I tend not to write stories that are directly about the speculative element. In part because there are lots of people doing that, and then those stories are out there, and then that's fine. So I can do this other thing.
That's really interesting. I thought it was funny that you should mention it's not about fixing the bicycle, because the story about the barricade is definitely not about fixing the barricade.
No, it's not. Well, again, it's that sort of thing. Is that part of it is actually Max Gladstone talks about this with respect to Superman stories, where the Superman story that you see a lot, and they are with Superman, the canonical Superman story, and it's one that's actually not very interesting, is the one where, well, can he super his way out of the problem? If that's the question we're asking, the answer is invariably yes. He's Superman. That's what he does. So the most interesting stories are the ones that where yes, he is still absolutely Superman, and then yes, he can fly and bullets bounce off him, and then he does all of those things. But the question is not, can he super his way out of this problem? Like the interesting Superman story is not the one where if he can just punch hard enough, it will resolve the central issue, because yes, he can punch hard enough. That's, who cares? Right. So likewise with I feel like I should at least attempt to get the title right. So in a cost benefit analysis of the proposed trade-offs for the overhaul of the barricade. Yay! By the way, I can't do that drunk. So there. Part of it is that I placed people there who are so competent that if the question is, can they fix the barricade? the answer is yes. Like, yes, they can absolutely fix the barricade. That's not the problem. In part because the way the story is set up, if they can't fix the barricade, civilization ends, and it's a very short story.
Yeah, that was my impression.
So the barricade is there, and so the barricade is there, and then the actual fixing of the barricade has an impact on a relationship. But ultimately, it's about the relationships between the various characters, because and then we discover these relationships, and then it's through, in this case, what happens with respect to the barricade, or yeah, I mean that's but for me that's the thing, is because basically if it's a question of, I mean, these to me the question of, well, can they fix it? In that scenario is kind of a non-question, because they have to be able to. Like anybody, like you read in 3 paragraphs, you realize that they have to be able to. So that's not that's not going to hold anyone for very long.
Sure. So let me ask you, when you're putting a story together, would you say that the kernel that occurs to you first is the relationship piece, or is it something where ideas coalesce from various directions at the same time?
It really depends. It depends on the story. Like I get inspired by I get inspired by. I mean, like part of it is that I am like a walking collector of useless information. Like I never remember anything useful, but if it's useless, it'll probably stick in my head. And you know, and then a bunch of them, and every once in a while I can put a bunch of them together, and it will be and there will be something interesting, like the story that Tor.com published in 2015 called Hold Time Violations, because by then I had learned my lesson with respect to titles that no one can remember. So where you know, I mean where the opening scene was basically inspired by me walking. Like I live down the street from a I live down the street from a T station, so I go to that T station a lot. And then the opening scene was basically inspired by me walking into that T station and then seeing the crowds rush by and hearing the announcements overhead, and then noticing because the announcement is always that basically a train is about to arrive. Yeah. But and then me noticing that the announcement is out of sync with the train. Like by the time you hear the announcement, not only has the train arrived, but the people are, but people have left the train and they are like flooding the train station, you know. And then so a lot of so in that case, it was inspired by me walking into that train station and seeing that happen. I mean, unfortunately, that's not a story. That's a very nice description of a setting. And then in that case, the story ended up being inspired by things being out of sync, and then from there I can create characters and then from there I can sort of create the characters that go with that, and come up with relationships. Right. But there are times where I go, hey, this is a nifty relationship. I would like to explore it. You know. But I mean, so I guess that wasn't quite fair of me to ask, because in some sense the relationships are in a way sort of canonical. They're like, you know, there's always a new wrinkle on father-son relationships, for example, and there's always, you know, relationships between people who love one another, that sort of thing. But there's an interesting element, I think, of what I would call almost like dramatized metaphor. Sure. In the stories, you know, like the setting and the speculative element are like an expansion of the central question of the relationship in an interesting way. Like, for example, the water that falls on you from nowhere is about honesty in a relationship. I mean, I hope you feel the same way. This is what I got out of it. Speaking as somebody who hasn't spoken to you about this piece before, but you chose a really interesting way of adding a speculative element to just sort of
take that question and make it very tangible, I guess. For those of us who are listening who may not have read this story, in The Water That Falls on You from Nowhere, anytime you lie, water falls on you out of nowhere. So that it basically gives some physical stakes to what ordinarily would just have emotional stakes, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, basically, if you're me, you find if you're me, you find yourself constantly defending why that story is speculative fiction. Which so I will. So if I sound a little defensive, I will just apologize in advance.
Oh, you don't need to defend it to me, by the way. I'm with you on it.
but certainly one of the things that one of the characteristics of speculative fiction, is the literalized metaphor.
Right.
And in this case, the water is effectively a literalized metaphor. Because in that the ramifications of a lie are not just internal and emotional, but it is physicalized, and it is made to have actual physical substance, which makes the story sound way more intellectual than it reads. It's actually a much more fun read than that. But
well, I mean, the part of what we do on the show is we get geeky about all the cool stuff that you don't get to put in the text, right? You want somebody to just dive in and have a really cool experience and not worry about the nitty-gritty of how it was done. But at the same time, I think one of the things that we can do here is explore that a little bit and say, well, I was thinking about this or whatever.
But I will say the interesting thing about that story is that there are people that get through that entire story and never recognize that the water is literal. I mean, like they get through that entire story and they still well, because it is treated in a metaphorical fashion, that they think of it as entirely metaphor, despite the fact that I'm describing wet sofas and wet floors, and then despite the fact that at one point the water falls on basically oil and the oil splatters. Despite the fact that I'm describing all of these very physical, concrete reactions, there are people who read that entire story and then think that the water is entirely metaphorical. I'm not sure how this happens. But I do think that is. But I think that I mean I'm not going to go, they're reading it wrong. But I do think it's interesting how that happens.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, people bring different things, right, to reading. A lot of what we read is actually in our own heads, I can see why people would do that, but at the same time, there should be a lot of cues there, right?
Right. Just like this sounds awful. It makes it sound like I'm comparing myself to Karen Russell. So I just want to point out I am not comparing myself to Karen Russell, but like Karen Russell's Vampires in the Lemon Grove. There are vampires and they are in a lemon grove. This is not subtle, but there are in fact people who read the story and go, well, are they really vampires, or are you just calling them vampires? and I'm just like, they turn into bats. At one point they turn into bats, and I'm, so I guess what I'm saying is you do that the world is open to a wide variety of interpretations. When you are doing the sort of thing where you have this very specific, concrete, speculative element, but it can be, but it is a literalized metaphor. There are in fact people that will just read it as a metaphor and go then. It's not what I intended, but as long as they enjoy the story, yay. So so that happens.
So when you're designing a story, and I'm gonna focus specifically on the Barricade story and also Magic Lightning story, because of the intricacies of the scenario. Because you've got the Barricade, which has all of these different features, and you've got this telepathy, and you've got libraries, which are things that move and look like elephants, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the surround, as opposed to Water That Falls on You is a little bit more strictly defined by reality, I guess you'd say. And the magic lightning, you've got this guy who, even though he seems to live in the real world, he's had all these extreme procedures done on his body to make him super strong, and it's very I would say it feels like near future. So how do you go about creating the settings surround that kind of aspect of the story?
Okay. Haphazardly. Well, the thing is, I mean, I am very much like I am very much a writer who ends up discovering things as I write and go, hey, this is cool. I will write about this. I mean, the upshot is that my stories invariably are not about what they started out being about. Like,
oh, that's interesting.
Like, by the time I get to the end, I probably have written a different story than what I set out to write. Which, I mean, it's not bad. I mean, no, I mean mostly because I'm in a position where either I'm not writing to order, or the target is sufficiently broad and vague that as long as I get within, like, that as long as I get like close enough actually is close enough. Like, but what that means is that I do a lot of writing where I will go into a scene and I will figure out what does the scene need, and then once I do, like, it, I mean, it's very inside out. It's not that I have designed the world and, oh, hey, let's figure out what story. It's more that the story and the world sort of co-evolves. Again, I'm not saying that I'm George Saunders, because I would not mind writing that well. But one of the things that George Saunders talks about is, by the way, I will say it was extremely validating to hear him say this, because this means that I do something that George Saunders does, but except that he does it better. But he will talk about how basically good sentences have a rhythm to them. And then so what he finds is that sometimes the sentences that he wants to write, the sentences that the good sentence that he wants to write perhaps has more words than the sentence that he's actually writing, and then which means he needs to stick in words, and then from that then because he's an amazing writer, what he does when he comes up with a good sentence is that the good sentence invariably has more detail. It's invariably a richer experience. But in the process of doing that, so in the process of coming up with these really beautiful sentences, he is also defining his world, because suddenly rather than just there being a couch in the room, the couch has developed a history of its own. So the couch, so the couch may suddenly now be threadbare, or there may be like this little rip in the corner or something. And by the way, if you notice, the zen of how John writes is basically John steals shamelessly from amazing writers, because
I think we all do. I mean, I think that we internalize language in a very interesting way from the sources where we find it, and then it comes back in some different combinations. But I think there's always some contribution from the thing that we've internalized.
Sure, and then so likewise, you have Chip Delaney, who talks about, I mean, I don't quite do this because I'm obviously not quite as visual as Chip, but he talks about being able to sort of to visualize and really being able to sort of to like immerse yourself in a particular setting, and to be able to dig out those very specific details. No, I mean, like, it was interesting. Chip is actually one of my clarinet instructors. So
oh, great.
Basically each instructor has a reading for Clarion's Mysterious Galaxy, and he was reading from, I forget which novel it was, but but there was this very long, vivid description of buttering toast, and then basically we meaning the students all thought it was a bit much because I mean the problem with reading aloud and reading is that it's a different pace than reading on a piece of paper, reading on a page. So I think it would have worked fine on the page, but reading aloud, it was like 10 minutes of buttering toast because he had described it in such vivid, loving detail. But I will also maintain that that Chip got the last laugh because I can go to any one of my Clarion classmates and they all still remember like that description of buttering toast because it was done so beautifully and intricately. So so I mean like we can mock it, but it works. And also it's Chip Delaney, everything he writes is amazing. But but I think there's a lot of that.
Well, I think depending on how you approach it, it can be different. Like different authors go deeper into detail in certain things, and different authors come and they, like they choose different things to pay attention to.
Yes, but I guess my I'm going to circle back around to my point now. Sorry, which is that I know lots of authors, and then they can sort of construct the world, and they can sort of they can sort of construct the world, they can sort of construct the story, and then they go write it. And then I am very much not that person. Actually I may have a structure in my head, but it's not necessary. Like I may know, okay, I need a scene that does A, a scene that does B, and a scene that does C, but at least it probably doesn't get any further than that. And so most of the actual world building details comes out as I write, as I realize, oh, I need something that does this. I need something to fulfill this function. What can fulfill this function that plays with what I already have? Or do I need to change something that I already have to make this work out? So does it? I mean, so it feels like it's growing as you write, then? Right. For me, it's a much more organic process where the story and the world sort of co-evolve. I mean, that said, the thing that I do after I'm done is that after I'm done with the draft, is I actually do go back and outline and I organize that. Like I actually go to do all of that. It just happens after. Because otherwise we have this unstructured. Well, otherwise I have this unstructured mess. Like there are people who write brilliant publishable first drafts, and then and they're amazing. I have to go back and go, okay. I have to go back and go, okay. What is the world that I what is the world that I actually built, and what story did I actually write? And then go back and make it look like that's what I meant to do all along. Sure, and like work on consistency and all that kind of stuff. Do you ever find yourself doing research after you've written? I do. Well. See, the nice thing about this is that after you've written, you now know what you need to do. You now know what you need to do research on. Yeah. I mean, part of it is I to a certain extent I'm constantly doing research, because if I'm going in if I'm going in knowing, oh, I need to understand how birds fly, for example, I will read some books on how birds fly. But there are also any number of cases where my first draft has a little note saying must research whatever, but for me, and I mean, the only thing that I try not to do when I fail at this is I try not to research while I'm writing, because then I research and I don't write. I try not to do that. I don't always succeed, because I mean, let's face it, the reason that you need to do this research is that you want to make sure that what you're doing is true, has some truth to it. Yeah. And then sometimes you really do just need to know at that point, like whether or not this is something that can in fact happen. because but like I said, I'm a collection. Like I said, I'm a collection of useless knowledge, and so a lot of times when I'm writing, I'm drawing on that collection of useless knowledge. So for some stories, in a sense, I've done the research ahead of time. I just didn't.
Yeah. So I'm specifically curious about some of the medical stuff that you put in Making the Magic Lightning Strike Me. Did you research that?
Oh yeah.
Or in the middle, or at the end, or how did that work?
Oh, okay. Well, okay. One of the things about being 5'6" is that you do have sort of, at least I have this lifelong, but like you do in fact grow up with this lifelong question of how do I be taller. So a lot of the surgery stuff I actually knew before I wrote the story.
Wow.
And actually one of the reasons why this is set in the near future is that some of the things I suggest are actually at this point implausible. Like they are clearly extrapolations from what we can do now. So that I knew, like they're the only thing I absolutely had to look up was the name of the surgery, because I don't remember that. But but for example, I remember seeing stories on TV and remember reading articles about surgeries that basically lengthen. I mean for the most part, they're, I mean, in real life, they're lengthening their calves, to get a few more inches. That's the cosmetic side of it. I mean, the actual purpose of it is actually reconstructive surgeries, and then in cases where people are born or due to an accident end up with limbs of uneven, like say legs of unequal length, and then you like to have like the same length legs. Life is much happier that way.
Right.
That's actually the primary medical purpose of that surgery. It's just that there are also people who would like to be taller. So a lot of that I actually knew ahead of time, and I do a lot of weightlifting. So by the way, I should point out that I do not take steroids. Because the problem is, you say I do a lot of weightlifting and you write a story about steroids and people think things. So
sure.
I should just.
I've heard tons of authors say, explain all the things that they've been told that they do by people who read their work, and like most of the time it's like there's no connection. So yeah, I totally.
Right. It's like there are any number of mystery authors who have not murdered all of these people.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but it's very hard to do a lot of weightlifting without doing a lot of inadvertent research, without doing a lot of inadvertent research on why those people have the incredibly huge muscles. So a lot of. So a lot of that was research. I mean, actually went back. For that story, I actually ended up doing a little more research, in part because like one of the interesting things that I found out that actually didn't make it into the story is that for example, CrossFit is starting to have its own steroid crisis.
Where is this?
CrossFit.
Oh, CrossFit. Okay.
Because if you look at competitive CrossFit, again, you see sort of these very muscular, incredibly flexible people who apparently have like these marathon workouts, and then people are starting to wonder, how are they able to do this and not die? Yeah. So actually, right. So a lot of the physical mods there are things that I looked into and then sort of turned up a couple of notches.
Right.
And at one point there's a break into a house. That's actually SEAL Team 6 breaking into Osama bin Laden's house.
Oh, really?
the accounts that I could find. I'm sure that's not how it actually happened, but that's based on the official account.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting, though. So you picked a specific instance to kind of
as a template.
Oh, it's interesting.
Because I don't know enough about because I'm not Mike Cole. So I don't know enough about military tactics well, I'm not. So I don't know enough about military tactics to do something to just make something up. So I picked an actual home invasion to use as a template.
Wow.
I mean, it's not precisely how it happened. I may have changed some things.
Oh, no. I mean,
but it's a template.
That makes perfect sense. You take it, but one of the things about a real event, the reporting of a real event, is you get a lot of interesting detail, and it's the kind of detail that you wouldn't necessarily know to put in, if you weren't there. So yeah. And you can also say, well, I noticed that in an official report of a home invasion, these are the kinds of things that appear, and then you can kind of go play with them, right?
Right, but the exterior is more or less Osama bin Laden's house.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting technique. I like it. It's fun to talk to you because I speak with a lot of people who are planners, right? The people that you describe who go out and they build a world and they get and then they and then they go looking for a story in it, right?
I'm not nearly so organized.
Well, but you know what? It's not. This is what's valuable about this, is that not everybody works the same way, and some people, if they figure out everything before they start, they don't feel like the story comes alive for them. And so I think it's really helpful, because every story has world building, right? I mean, you have to create a world on the page. There is no world on a page. It's a page, right? So whether you're creating something that's an analog of the real world, or whether you're creating something that's a secondary world, or something, incredibly elaborate or fantastical or whatever, you're doing that work. And it's really fun to hear about your process and hear how things sort of develop as you go into it. Do you, I was going to ask a minute ago, do you study psychology or anything like that? Where does your inspiration for the relationship details come from?
I probably should study psychology. That's actually a really good idea. I should probably do that. Okay. Some of it is drawn from my personal experience. Although now I have to throw in the caveat that it's not autobiography, but because I think I actually do think that good fiction always contains some element of the author, but I also think that autobiography is probably the least creative way of doing it.
Right.
So so some of it is that, some of it is that I listen. I have friends and I listen to all of them. Some of it is that a lot of it is just reading. I do a lot of reading, and then I follow the news, and they're always interesting. They're always interesting circumstances, interesting relationships but so a lot of it is that again I go back to improv and then sort of the ability to take inspiration from whatever happens to be around you.
That's a good point.
But I like the idea of studying psychology. I should probably do that.
Well, it can't hurt, right?
No, it can't hurt. Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm over here taking notes so I don't miss anything. So with 10 minutes to go, why don't I open up for some questions from everybody else? Thoughts?
I'm finding it fascinating that I originally thought, what do you mean you tell your stories from improv? And then I realized that this is a way of thinking about drafting and world building that I've never thought of before, of sort of coming up with your story as a long form improv thing, and then taking essentially what is the recording of that improv session that you've had between you and your writing implement, and then polishing it as if you were, if we were still working on the improv metaphor, turning it into a play with a script after you've had the session. And that's really fascinating. I know people who talk about having a dialogue with their characters, and the characters wanted to do this, and part of me has always found that really bizarre. And then I tried that, and it was really different. So I'm very curious to think about what happens if I just sort of take the model of, all right, let's just start with the what ifs and the improv, and then worry about, is it structured and paced and toned and consistent later. I have a story that is stuck right now because I've done some really tricky things that when I set the world down, it takes me 3 readings and another week until I can get back into it again. And I think that it sounds like something different might happen if I stop trying to push it the way I have been.
Sure, I can see that. I mean, it's funny because one of the things you mentioned was the whoa, my characters took a life of their own, and then it's funny because if you talk to, I believe it's Connie Willis, she just sort of says, well, my characters do what my characters do what I tell them to, and it's interesting because because like you have the tail and you have the dog, and it's not always clear which part is the tail and which part is the dog, because there are people that will say, well, I have created these characters and I'm going to set them on the stage, and I'm going to see what happens when they interact. But if you talk to Connie Willis, she's completely the other way around. She is saying, well, I created these characters because these are the characters that would enact the story that I have in mind. And then and I think either one. I think either one can work. I think where you get into problems is if you've decided, well, this is the story I want to tell, and it must happen with these characters, and then those two things turn out not to match. I actually think that that's where you run into a problem. But as long as you have like a degree of freedom in one or the other, or possibly both, then you will find something. I will say that if you have too many degrees of freedom, what you find might not have been what you were looking for in the first place. Which I am actually for the most part fine with.
Right. I mean, hey, if a cool story happens, then great.
Right.
Yeah, actually, I'll remark that, in fact, early on when I was writing, I ran into a situation exactly like what you're describing, where I had a very specific idea of the character and I had a very specific idea of what would happen, and then I realized that this guy was not going to do what he needed to do. It wasn't going to be consistent with the way I'd set him up, and then I had to go back and do like all this soul searching and like, oh man, and I ended up changing his character. But it was an interesting moment, right? Where because personally, I think there's a sort of I guess you'd call it a dialectic, maybe. There's a sort of a push and pull between the different elements of the story, because you can put characters on a stage and watch what they do. You can also have an idea. It sort of breathes back and forth, as far as I'm concerned, a little bit the way that language change happens,
Oh, sure.
or cultural change happens. You just do it, and then, yeah. Right. Planning and doing are two sides of the same coin, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, I think it ends up being important not to be too attached to anything, which is kind of ironic. Which is kind of an ironic thing for me to say, because like I version control I version control my fiction, so technically I never lose anything. But well, that's not quite true because I don't version control diligently. But it is all version control. But again, there's sort of this very improv notion of like basically like if something goes by, it goes by. You can always bring it back later. Like if I have a really great idea for something, or if I have a really cool character, like it doesn't necessarily have to show up in this story. It can be like the next story or some other story. Like nothing's ever really lost, because nothing's ever really lost. Cutting it is not like cutting it from a given story is not a tragedy.
Right.
You know, or if you were trying to write story A and you wrote story B instead, but this means that you now have another chance to write story A.
Right. That's an interesting point. So Che's asking in the chat bar, do you end up with a lot of discarded stories that go unfinished?
I actually don't. Part of it is for good or bad, and I'm not sure whether this is good or bad. I have sort of developed the ethic of I'm going to finish the story even if it kills me. I mean, to some extent, I think it's good in that in that it forces me through the entire process. Because the problem with like a lot of unfinished stories is that what it means is at some point you are you write an amazing first 5 pages, like because you have practiced writing the first 5 pages over and over again, but you never get any, but if you never finish a story, you never like practice making the thing land. So part of it is and you know and I guess what I'm saying is, and then we would all like those stories that write themselves. I think I've had one that kind of wrote itself. And like everything else, you kind of have to fight your way through. I mean, like I used to joke that the water that falls on you from nowhere was like having to do a root canal on a stranger's, like on a stranger, and it's your first root canal, and all you had was a rusty banjo and a tuna. You know, like that was not. It turned out to be a very difficult story to write, and you know, so there's a part of me that is like, I will get to the end of the story, and then once I get to the end of it, I will see what I do with it. I mean, I've written stories that will never see the light of day, but they're finished.
Okay. And
then you know, and then I have learned a lot from writing those stories. But I will be dead. But my goal is to be such a noted, you know, and an author of such incredible reputation that after I'm dead, and this is the key, after I am dead, they will find these stories and go, oh, look at John's juvenilia. But otherwise they will never see. I mean, they're not very good. But I learned a lot from writing them, and I think part of the value there was that I finished them.
Yeah.
I think I'm a better writer because I finished them rather than going, oh my God, this is hopeless.
Yeah. Well, here we are at the end of the hour. Thank you so much for being here with us, John. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I think it'll be really cool for the people who have never seen anything like this on my show before. But like, you know, this is great. This is like a new discovery for me. So I'm really glad to have you on.
Can you unpack that?
So let's see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you all and do my requisite directing everyone to my Patreon. So go look me up, Juliet Wade on Patreon. And I am not sure what we're discussing next week, but we will talk about it and figure some things out. And I will make sure to announce it because I'm doing Monday morning or Monday announcements, maybe not the morning, but Monday announcements of the topic of the week. And they will show up as public posts on the Patreon. So hopefully that'll be a place where people can visit and find out things and keep abreast of what's going on. I will try to have the report on our discussion here tonight up before next week because I'm finally getting caught up on my work. And thanks again so much, John, for being here with us.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
I will now stop the broadcast.